welcome to Commander Central episode 163. And today we're going to take a look back at cards we've tried and tested from Throne of Eldraine and report how they've done, and maybe mention any cards we've seen other people play from that set that have been value in games. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
And it's just the two of us, Max.
It is just the two of us, and it's going to be just the two of us for quite a while.
So Chris wound up, I believe, falling down some stairs at his house. Was that exactly what happened?
That is exactly what happened.
He tripped on something. I don't remember if it was a toy or if he's just bad
Laundry,
at walking.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And broke his foot in several places, and I wound up going in the day before Thanksgiving to have surgery on his foot.
Yes.
So he is homebound with his foot elevated for the foreseeable future, at least a couple weeks. We're not going to have him available. So we'll be either doing shows, the two of us, or we'll be having a rotating cast of special guests on to fill in for Chris over the course of the next few weeks.
Sounds like a plan.
So, yes, nothing too serious. I mean, it's serious enough that he had to have surgery, but like he'll be back in podcasting with us, hopefully in the not too distant future. But yeah, he's homeward bound, at least for here a little bit. So
yeah, he'll get back as soon as he can.
Yeah. So Max, how was your Thanksgiving?
Really good. Quiet. Just hung out with my dad all weekend.
Oh, nice.
And some friends, but that's about it.
Yeah, mine was relatively low key as well. I did have Thanksgiving at my sister's house, which is what we usually do on Thanksgiving Day. And then the next day we do things with my wife's family, which has just always worked out nicely. So we did that and then spent the rest of the weekend. Well, it kind of snowed and we were mostly housebound for the better part of Saturday and Sunday. So we just kind of took it easy and watched a little bit of The Mandalorian and did things like that. So it was and ate leftovers, which is a pretty great weekend.
Yeah, real good. Did you go out and do some shopping?
I didn't, although I've already done some of it, so I'm like actually really being responsible this year. And the last of the stuff that we needed for people, we actually ordered today online while we were watching The Mandalorian. So my wife and I got the last of it all taken care of. Very
nice.
Yeah. So I'm a responsible adult with my Christmas shopping done. Thanksgiving weekend, I'm good to go.
Very, very nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting pretty good at this whole thing. I've been an adult for 20 some years now, and I'm finally figuring it out. That's not bad.
That's more than I can say.
So, Max, did you get any games in this week at the shop at all?
I did not.
So we play on Tuesday night, and at that point, it's getting pretty close to Thanksgiving, and the weather was also bad. We had storms due that night, so it was relatively quiet in the shop. You weren't there. Obviously, Chris wasn't because he was getting ready for surgery. There was probably a dozen people in the shop. So I played, I think, 3 games before I was like, okay, well, the snow is starting to come down. I'm going to get out of here. And then everyone bailed roughly like around that time as well. I did have one really good game with my Jeru deck. I had been pondering pulling out Gideon Champion of Justice for a long time, and he's the one that you get a loyalty counter on him. His +1 puts a loyalty counter on him for each creature target opponent controls. And then at some point you can -15 him to exile all other permanents, lands included.
Yep.
So ideally you want to roll Gideon up to a very impressive number, -15 him, have him still be alive with like a certain amount of counters on him, because he also has an ability where he can become a creature with power and toughness equal to the number of counters on him. So like if you can get him with a gazillion counters on him somehow, and then -15, kill everybody, and then still have Gideon there that you can turn into a 20/20 or something, then you can just kill people and it's easy peasy. It's not easy to put 40 some counters on a planeswalker. And I've never been able to do it successfully at all. But it just so happened, playing my Jeru deck this week against someone who was making a ton of zombie tokens. And it was a situation where I was able to, when they had, 14 or 16 or something tokens out, I was able to then play Gideon and use his ability to put a ton of counters on him, which I copied with Rings of Brighthearth.
Oh, wow.
And then was able to survive at that point because everyone could clearly see what was going to happen was able to survive everyone's crackbacks. Back to my turn, and actually I had 40 counters on him, I think. So when I'm minus 15 to exile everything else, he was still able to then turn into a 25/25 creature.
Dang.
So that was Gideon did work that game. That was definitely the most he's ever done. So yeah, that was my most prideful game from that evening. I got to actually see Jero do a lot of work. So it was a pretty quiet night of the shop, but that was a worthwhile story to tell. And if anyone out there has any stories they want to tell us, how will they reach us, Max?
You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. We're on YouTube, where you'll find this show and all of our other shows by searching CMDR Central. We're on Facebook. Pretty much just Google CMDR Central and you'll find us.
Absolutely. And this show is going to air on December 2nd?
Correct.
Technically, we'd have some contests wrapping up, but because it was Thanksgiving weekend, we just didn't get everything done. So we'll do those announcements on the next Monday show.
Yep. The new contests and the contest winners will be announced on the show on the 9th.
And because we are actually not going to be having a Thursday show this week either.
That is correct. No Thursday show this week due to the holiday. Because
last weekend, the day we usually record is on Thanksgiving, and between that, throwing our schedule off, and then Chris's whole foot thing, we got one and done. We're like, we'll just get one done for the week, and that's enough to accomplish given the variables thrown our way. So we'll just have the Monday show this week, and we'll be back next week with the usual suite of 2 shows, one on Monday and a deck tech on Thursday.
Perfect.
That all sounds very good. Any other housekeeping stuff we need to take care of here, Max?
Not really. I think we're ready to rock and roll.
Well, before we get into the main topic, there is a announcement we had, and I'd like to talk at least about the Secret Lair product here a little bit.
Okay, perfect.
So that's going to go on sale. This show will go live, and I believe that stuff all comes up for sale this week. Is that correct?
Yes, it all comes out, starts coming out on sale when the show airs on the 2nd.
So the product doesn't ship right away, but you have basically a 24-hour window to place your order for whichever of these, 7 different products?
I think it's 7.
And they're all very, very different. So you can basically pick whichever one you want to get or get them all in one bundle. And they will then at some point down the road, I'm not sure if it's a month or whatever it is, because they're going to print based on the amount of orders they get. So instead of trying to get in quickly to get this product before it's sold out, you just have a small window to get it purchased. But if you do, you're guaranteed to get that product.
Yes.
And it's just a weird mix of alt art versions of a bunch of different cards, basically, right? That's like the best way to describe it, I would say.
That is exactly how I would describe it. Some are foil, some are not foil.
It's kind of like a small signature spellbook kind of product, maybe, with,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just but it's kind of a cool way to get some reprints out there. Are any of these ones you're interested in, first of all, here, Max?
I'm kind of interested in the Bitter Blossom one and the Kaleidoscope Killers set, the 5-color pack of the 3 legends.
So the Bitter Blossom one is called Bitter Blossom Dreams that you're referring to, and it comes with an alt art version of Bitter Blossom, and the art on it is also the text box and stuff is transparent, so it kind of looks like those
old promos you'd used to get at F&M.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a great piece of art too. Those Lorwyn fairies always look cool. So in addition to the Bitter Blossom, it comes with 4 fairy tokens.
Correct. All new art.
Yep.
Each card is a different art. Yep.
And they're kind of a panorama when you put them together as well. That is $30 for that product. But I mean, the cheapest version of Bitter Blossom is close to $50-ish.
Yeah.
So if you want a Bitter Blossom or think you're going to want a Bitter Blossom, I mean, maybe this dings the price down of Bitter Blossom to, $25 or something. I don't know. That still seems like if you want to buy Bitter Blossom, why buy a single when you could just buy this?
Oh, for sure.
So yeah, I'm eyeballing it as well too, because actually I have a Bitter Blossom and it's currently in your.
It's in my Regnan Krav
deck. But I kind of was like, well, this is a cool alt art, and Bitter Blossom goes in a lot of decks.
Yeah.
If you ever build anything with a sacrifice theme, that's going to go in there. I'm putting a fairies deck for my wife together, so that's a good spot for it too. So Yeah, that seems like a pretty good deal, I think, and that's one I'm definitely considering. We can go over the rest of them just real briefly here. There's one called Eldraine Wonderland. That's just a set of 5 basic snow lands with an altar art on them.
And they're foil.
And they're foil as well. And the art looks really, really good and semi-Eldraine themed as well. So those are really sharp. I mean, the problem there is I don't know who needs just one of each.
Yeah,
I feel like,
you're going to have to buy a lot of them to get your 30-some for your monocolored deck in EDH.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you're doing something with maybe Field of the Dead, where you just want one of each in a 5-color deck for Field of the Dead or something, maybe, I don't know.
Or it's you and you only run like 4 basics total.
Right.
So
Right, then we're fine, right. Yeah, maybe. There's one called Restless in Peace, which is just a collection of kind of graveyard-based cards, Golgari Thug, Life from the Loam, and Bloodghast. Again, Bloodghast is closing in on a $15 card. Life from the Loam, I think, is $20. So you're basically like, if you're looking to buy those singles, why not just buy this and get a cool art version of one of those cards, and you're spending the same amount of money. The next one we have Seeing Visions, which is just 4 different versions of Serum Visions. That's kind of a strange
I don't understand this one except for maybe those modern players.
I would guess. Explosion Sounds, which is just a collection of 5 different goblins that are all basically in the art blowing things up.
I love the art on these goblins. Like there's a cats one we'll get to in a little bit here, but they all have this more like hyper animated art versus the normal magic art. And all of these goblins remind me of like the goblins from the Netflix show Troll Hunters.
Yeah, for sure.
It looks just like all of those characters. So I kind of want this one just for the art, but I don't play goblins otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only one, like the Bitter Blossom art looks like pretty traditional magic art, as does the Eldraine Wonderland lands. But the Restless in Peace art has a real unique kind of color scheme and design that you don't see on magic cards. The Serum Visions ones are absolutely very psychedelic and trippy, and these Explosion Sounds ones are absolutely art you do not see on magic cards as well.
Right.
So same thing, if you're playing a goblin deck or something, that seems like a decent value thing to pick up if you want those cards. Kaleidoscope Killers, you also mentioned, Max. You want to go over that one here quick?
Yeah, so this is a set of 3 5-color legendary creatures. You get a copy of Reaper King, Sliver Overlord, and the Dragon. All with brand new art, which kind of has that trippiness to it, kind of like the Serum Visions. Really watercolory looking art. It looks super cool, and they're all foil too. Yeah,
those all look great. And again, Sliver Overlord is not a cheap card. Reaper King is, I think, $10-ish. Dragon is, I think, I want to say somewhere in there as well, if not more. If you want one of those cards, it's a pretty good way to get your card and have a unique version of it and have some other stuff to do something with down the road as well. I don't know if I need any of these or want them, but man, that Dragon looks fantastic. They all look really good, but Dragon looks great.
Yeah.
Oh my God, kitties.
This one is interesting.
So you have just some hyper bizarre cat cards, basically. They're like super cute cats, with the exception of Arabo, which is just a really house cat looking Arabo with a crazy mane.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as stylized as the rest. If you're playing a cat deck and you're into cats, I can see why it's a great pickup.
I do like the art on the Leonin War Leader. That DreamWorks kind of style animation. He's holding a knife in his mouth. That looks pretty cool.
I think this is probably the one where it probably has the least value, I would guess, like physical, cash value wise. Like the Bitter Blossom one obviously is a pricey card, so you're getting your value here. I don't know if any of these are really worth very much, so you're definitely only getting this if you're looking for that specific weird cat art. But hey, that's a thing for a lot of people.
Right. So,
yeah, I'm going to pick up something. I haven't entirely decided which one, probably the Bitter Blossom as well. Do you like this product, Max?
I like the concept. I really do. I think majority of these ones, though, kind of missed the mark for me. I only really like 2 of the 7.
Sure. Well, I would say, I think it's not even that they missed the mark necessarily. They're just so specific.
Yeah.
Like I can imagine versions of these where I'm buying all 7 of them just because it has something that speaks to me or is wanted for a particular deck. These are really like, no one's buying the cat one unless you have a cat deck for the most part. I would say the one that has the most general appeal is probably the Bitter Blossom one, just because that's a card that goes in a lot of decks. The rest are just really niche.
Yeah.
But I like the idea. I like the concept. It's a way to get difficult to reprint cards back out into the market to keep the price from going crazy. Like we didn't, for example, get a Mystic Remora here, but like that's a card that's really challenging for them to reprint because of the cumulative upkeep. And it's never going to be in standard. It's not going to be like in a Modern Horizons or something. So they're probably not going to put it in a Commander Precon. I wouldn't think, maybe, but there's just so few chances to print that kind of thing. Having these sets or having sets like the Signature Spellbook, I like that there's an option to print difficult to reprint cards.
Yeah.
And it's also easy to skip. Like if you don't want, these aren't new. They're just alt arts. If you don't have any interest in that, you don't feel bad about not participating in picking up any of the product. Because that's a real thing I hear from people too, are like, there's just so much stuff and I feel like I can't keep up with it. Things like this or the spell book, you don't need to keep up with it. If you don't want it, you just don't get any of it, and that's fine. So I think that also kind of lets them walk that line where they can still put product out there to sell packs because they're a business. I get that, without making it feel overwhelming and like you have to stay caught up. You can just skip this, and that's fine.
Yeah, especially with the limited release windows for each set, they're really appealing to the people who want these. I mean,
absolutely. If
you really want the Bitter Blossom one, you will be at your computer between 9 a.m. and 9 a.m. the next day to buy it.
Yeah, for sure.
Otherwise, this isn't something that you can just walk into your LGS and be like, hey, I'll take a spellbook, the Gideon spellbook, whatever, that's still sitting on the shelf from a year ago.
Well, and that's the downside here. I would mention, I mentioned the upside, but like, I also don't love them bypassing your LGS.
Oh yeah, I don't either, but
and I get it. Again, I get it. It makes them more money, but like, you need the LGSs to have people have a place to play too. That's an important part of the game, and particularly for Commander. There's no arena for us.
No.
So I don't love them bypassing the LGS for a lot of this, for stuff like this, but I don't think they're doing too much of it yet, and I'm hoping they bear that in mind in the future. So I'm okay with it happening once in a while. I just don't want it to be the norm.
Yeah, same here.
Anything else on this before we jump into the main show topic?
No, I don't. I think we talked about the ones we each like, so.
All right. So we're going to take a look at Eldraine. We've been making it a point this year to go back after a few months of making changes to decks when a new set comes out and trying to evaluate the cards we've put in, whether or not we've been happy with those, and maybe even ones that we didn't put in decks initially that we did see someone else use, you've now decided to run or at least have thoughts on having seen them in play. So is there any, I can throw it to you to start with, Max. What's the first card you want to talk about?
I think we'll talk about a card I'm sure is on both of our lists, and let's talk about the Great Henge.
Sure.
Because it's so good. So, this is that legendary artifact for 7 green. It costs X less, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And then it gets complicated because there's just so much this card does. You can tap it to add 2 green to your mana pool and gain 2 life. And then whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card.
In a recent EDH Rec show we did where we talk about cards that are gravy, basically like that have extra things in them that aren't necessary to make the card good. This one doesn't need to be anything but Guardian Project with the scaling casting costs on it. Like if it's just Guardian Project where it costs, X less to cast based on the power of creatures you control, it's completely playable. But it's a mana rock that taps for 2, not 1, and gains you life when it's doing that. None of that, and it puts a counter on a thing. Like it does 10 things that aren't necessary for it to be a playable card.
Yeah, it is. It's bonkers how powerful this card is. And the times I've seen it get cast against me, it doesn't stay very long, or people forget one of the things. They forget the counter, they forget to draw,
Right. It's almost right. There's so many good things happening. It's easy to miss.
Yes, I have seen it once in my Dramoka deck.
So as high as we were on it going in, do you think that was the correct assessment?
Yes.
I mean, if anything, I think it's maybe better than we thought, just because I don't know if I've seen it ever cost anybody more than 2 mana. Like, I'm sure someone's cast it where it's been 2 green and something else.
Yeah, so I run this in my Dramoka deck, and I pretty much based it off of, well, if Dramoka's out, it's going to cost me 4 mana.
2 of which you get back.
And 2 of it I'm going to get right back.
Right.
So it's going to cost me 2 mana.
And like, I think one time in my Glissa deck when I cast it, it was like 2 and 2 green or something because I had whatever it was. But for the most part, I just cast it for 2 mana and then immediately tap it for 2 mana.
Yeah.
It's disgusting. And it's been the same way whenever anyone else has cast it. And I've even had it copied, I think, 2 different times by, whether it's Phyrexian Metamorph or whatever it is. And it's just gross then too. Like, it's has to get dealt with. The amount of value it generates is crazy, and it's every bit as good as it looked to be from when we were previewing it.
Yeah.
So the first one I'm going to jump in here and mention is a land we did talk about, Mystic Sanctuary. That's the common island. It's a land island type that taps for a blue. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other islands. And when it enters the battlefield untapped, so assuming you have 3 or more islands, it comes into play untapped, you may put an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't quite know why I didn't kind of bump on how great that card was in our like we talked about it, but it didn't really register to me how powerful it was. It's seen play in I want to say modern, but like definitely standard. It's seen play in multiple other formats besides Commander. And the reality is, if you're playing mono blue, there's almost no downside to this card. I mean, occasionally you're going to draw it in your opening hand with like 1 other island and be like, okay, well, this is a keepable hand because of, X, Y, and Z, and it's going to go to waste and come in and play tapped, and that sucks. But like, people run all manner of cycling lands that come into play tapped every time, or they run guild gates, or they run the life gain lands that come into play tapped too. And there's not much upside to those. And the upside on this to go grab that board up again or grab a draw spell again is disgusting. Oh,
yeah. And, it's super nice that it doesn't say other basic islands on the check.
Just as island. Just as
so
island,
your dual lands are going to count. That's impressive.
And I think it probably is kind of tricky to hit that in a 2-color deck, although it's not impossible at all.
No.
But in a mono blue deck, that's just a free spell back in your hand.
Yeah.
Top of your library, but it's a free spell that you're going to recur just to the top of your library for just no cost to you at all. And, there's not a lot of reason necessarily, unless you need a shuffle effect, to run fetches in a mono deck, except for this gives you the ability to, at instant speed, ghost tutor this up and put it into play to bring a spell back top of your library, then draw it if you have top or something. Like, there's a lot of tricks you can do with this. And again, there's not much downside to doing that. Like, I haven't started running fetches in my mono blue deck just to get this, but like, that wouldn't be a bad play. Particularly if you're playing like an Urza, like if you're playing like cutting edge, like real close to CEDH level stuff. I mean, I would absolutely be dumping a bunch of fetches into my deck, get dinged for a couple life here or there to be able to get a counter spell back on instant speed, top of my library, and then draw it with something. There's just not any downside to this spell at all. And I definitely dropped the ball on this one.
Yeah, I definitely did as well.
So I have it in my mono blue deck right now, and I've just never regretted seeing it, and it just doesn't change. There was just 0 downside, and it's just all upside. So back to you, Max. What do you got?
I'm going to move on to All That Glitters.
Yeah.
This is one that I was excited for my Tuvasa deck.
Yep.
It's 1 and a white for an aura. It enchants the creature, and it gets +1/+1 for each each artifact and/or enchantment you control. So this was straight up replacing Helm of the Gods. It was my only artifact in that deck. It was an easy swap to make, but this just gets out of control so fast in an Enchantress deck, or even like an artifact deck like Brea, since it counts artifacts as well.
It's there's, again, it's one of those things, the biggest problem, because I have an Enchantress deck too, the biggest problem with all that glitters is I was like, I don't know what I'm going to pull for it, but I need to pull something because it's just too good.
Yeah.
So yeah, finding a slot for it was great, but you have successfully cast this in your Enchantress deck against me, and I can't remember if you killed me, but you killed somebody because of it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it helped win that game, but yeah, it's just another one where, it just stacks with something like Ancestral Mask, right?
Right, yeah.
There we go.
I've got a couple of rocks here I'm going to mention.
Okay.
First one is Arcane Signet. I mean, we said it was going to be
Trash card.
You're right. We did talk a little bit about how it's the problem is much more that it renders things redundant. It's just such an auto include that it becomes like Sol Ring number 2 almost. Mm-hmm. And that's true, but it's still a great card. I mean, there's nothing else to say about it, but it's as good as it seemed like it would be. Heraldic Banner is a 3-mana rock. When it enters battlefield, you choose a color, and you can tap it for a mana of the chosen color. But creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+0. So I'm running it in my mono blue Talrand deck because it makes a bunch of Drake tokens. Everything in the deck is blue. Basically, I swapped out some other, I can't remember what rock I took out to put it in Heraldic Banner. I think I took out Everflowing Chalice, which very often was cast as a 2-mana rock. So I had to sacrifice my 2-mana rock that would sometimes scale up for this 3-mana one, and that's never feels good. Ideally, you want to be, ramping on turn 2. In this case, I'm ramping on turn 3 with that, and that's never ideal. Giving all your creatures of that color in a mono-color token deck and giving them +1/+0, particularly in a deck where I'm regularly looking at 8 or 10 tokens out, that's the difference between killing somebody and not killing somebody. And I can't remember how high I was on this during our show, but it's been impactful in every game I've cast it. It's also one of those cards that's kind of subtle. Like, people look over and they're like, oh, I thought you were going to hit me for 8, and now you're going to hit me for 16. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I guess I take it, because they don't want to blow a removal spell on it either. They're like, okay, well, I'm going to get hit next turn. They're doing the math, and they determine if they can, like, it's tough to remove, even though it does generate a good amount of damage, because it's a mana rock. Who wants to remove a mana rock?
Nobody.
It's just been really, really useful in that deck. I think it's a little bit niche. I don't know how many decks I would run it in, but like if you're looking at something like Alela, where you make a fairy token for casting it in the first place, and then it buffs all your fairies that are all the same color. I would guess the vast majority of the fairies you make outside of Bitter Blossom in that deck are going to be blue. There's just a lot of decks where that's a really useful card, and I've been very happy with it.
Yeah, I honestly don't remember us even talking about this when we went through the set. So
yeah, I don't know if we did or not either.
This is definitely a sleeper in my book, and I'm really glad it's working out for you in your Talrand deck.
And the last rock I'm going to mention here is one that, again, I don't know if we talked about it all, and I didn't start running it until I saw somebody else playing it, I think, at the Command Fest in Chicago, and that's Midnight Clock. Midnight Clock is 2 and a blue, so it's a 3-mana rock. It taps for a blue. You can spend 2 and a blue to put an hour counter on it. At the beginning of each upkeep, put an hour counter on it. And when the 12th hour counter is put on Midnight Clock, shuffle your hand and a library into your graveyard and draw 7 cards, and then exile Midnight Clock.
Yeah. So
it's a mana rock, and in a multiplayer game in 3 turns, even if you don't put any mana into it, you just get to draw 7 cards and shuffle your hand and library into your graveyard, so you get some recursion then too. I saw it in Chicago, I think twice, and neither time did the player put any mana into it. They just played it as a rock, used it as a rock for a few turns, and then boom, went from 3 cards in hand to 7 cards in hand and recycled their entire graveyard. There was just no downside to that, and again, just pure upside. And if someone wants to remove your rock, they can remove your mana rock, and that's fine. That's kind of a win too. If you happen to have a bunch of mana to use it early, then I guess great. But if you don't, that's still really useful. There's way worse things to do with 3 mana than a mana rock. I mean, it's not ideal, but it's still gonna, like, if this couldn't tap for a mana, I'd be way less high on it. But the fact that it's useful doing things for you until it goes off, I was really impressed the 2 times I saw it, and I have since actually just this week added it to a deck. I hadn't had a chance to use it myself yet, but seeing it used against me, it was really impressive.
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen it played in the shop at all. I don't like that it's a must. Like that
yes,
counter hits
you
it.
don't have
and
a choice.
Yeah, that's literally my only downside to it. But otherwise, yeah, it's an awesome card, and I'm guessing you put it in Talrand.
I put it in Talrand. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those ones where, like, when I read it, I was like, yeah, that's fine. And then that was the end of it. Seeing it in play, it's much more impressive physically when it's in a game than it was on paper. So, and you know what? Since I'm talking about my Talrand deck here, I'm going to mention one more card that we I think kind of poo-pooed a little bit. And that's the Magic Mirror. And that was 6 and blue, so 9 total. Legendary artifacts. This is the blue equivalent of the Great Henge. It costs 1 less to cast for each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard, and you have no max hand size. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a knowledge counter on the Magic Mirror, then draw a card for each knowledge counter on the Magic Mirror. So we compared it to, I think, Thought, Reflection, which lets you draw a card for each counter. It kind of does a similar thing. And we're like, yeah, it's fine, but there's other things to do the similar thing. Again, this is a card that I saw people cast in other games. I think a Kess deck did it once I saw, and I don't remember what the other one was. And it was a situation where it wound up being just 3 blue.
Yeah.
Easily. Like, it wasn't even like they had to wait until turn 10. It was like turn 4 or 5. They're just like, okay, Tripp blue, I'm dropping the Magic Mirror, and now my spells cost 1 less. And you're like, oh, no, that's not great. And then next turn, draw a card, then 2. Then, like, and I think it got removed after 2 or 3 turns. But again, for Tripp blue, for a mana reducer, and it's going to maybe draw you a couple cards next turn, it was much better in reality than it looked when we were talking about it. So I had one, so I plugged into that Talrand deck as well, and I'm going to give it a go the next few weeks and see how it does for me. But at the very least, I can definitely say when it's been played against me, it's been way more impressive than I thought it was going to be.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, this is something you eventually have to deal with as an opponent because, by that 3rd counter, they're drawing 4 cards on their draw step, their upkeep, then their draw, they're getting 4 cards. That's just... It gets out of control, and then just ignore the fact if you can proliferate those counters at all.
Right. And you're drawing them, and they're easier to cast because of the cost reduction. So you're getting gas you can cast more of in 1 turn because of it. So, yeah, I've just been really impressed seeing that.
Yeah.
Back to you, Max. What do you got?
Kenrith's Transformation. This is 1 in a green.
Yeah.
It turns a creature into a 3/3 elk, and they lose all abilities, but the bonus, so it's essentially kind of like a Lignify, but the bonus is you get to draw a card when you cast this,
right,
or when it enters the battlefield. So this is just straight up replacing Lignify in almost all of my decks.
So the trade-off, the thought process here is, okay, well, the beauty of Lignify is, as a 0/4, it's not a threat to swing at you and deal damage, and 4 damage is a good bit it has to soak up before it dies, so that really makes the creature useless. Conversely, a 3/3 is a little more fragile. It dies to Lightning Bolt, for example, and it can chump block pretty effectively and swing back at you and hit you for 3, which is not nothing. But you get to draw a card, which is huge. And as we've seen from Beast Within and Generous Gift, yes, a 3/3 is not a 0/4. It's not nearly as friendly across the field, but it's just a 3/3. Yeah. It's just not that big of a deal. I also replaced Lignify with Chemist Transformation, and I think I've cast it twice, and at no point in time did I think, oh, I'm not sure about this trade. The card draw alone made me feel like, yep, that's great. I wish Lignify drew me a card.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, it helps out in Tuvasa because it's a double draw for me then, essentially. Ooh. It's just a powerful card, I think.
For sure.
Back to you, Dana.
Return of the Wild Speaker.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess I had envisioned that I would use the non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn more often. I think I've cast this 4 times, and I think I've seen it cast against me 3 to 4 times, and it's just a draw spell. That's all I've ever seen it cast as. I'm not saying that other mode won't get used once in a while, but the reality is the vast majority of the time that I've used it and seen it used, it's just been a better Soul's Majesty. But Soul's Majesty is a pretty good card, and being an instant speed version of it that scales down if someone removes a creature and gets around your own Lightning Greaves is a pretty big deal. It's been just a bomb when it's been cast against me. I cast it last week and drew 22 cards, which I needed to do to hit my Concordant Crossroads. But it got me there for for 5 mana. It got me down that far. That's fantastic at instant speed. So yes, this is a card I think we were all fairly high on. But aside from the note, but the fact that it's almost just a draw spell, it's still pretty great. And I think if it didn't have the other mode, I'd still be running it. It's just it's just so effective.
Especially at instant.
Yes, absolutely.
If it was sorcery, it's just Soul's Majesty, and that's not great.
Yep.
It's so good. I've actually used the overrun mode before. Yeah, I was a little bit of a win more situation. I casted that in my Dramoka deck and followed it up with an overwhelming Stampede.
Oh. Just to rub the salt in.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. Okay, Max, you're next.
My next one is Mirror Maid. I remember talking about this one on our review show. So it's 1 blue for an enchantment. It can enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. So another, somewhat like a Clever Impersonator, Phyrexian Metamorph. But the fact that it can do both is fun, and I have it in my Tuvasa deck. I'm just waiting for the day where I see it and can copy Annihilius Colossus.
I've had it cast against me twice, and I think when I mentioned before someone copying the Great Henge, I think it was with a Mirror Maid at least one of those times. Mm-hmm. I'm not running it anywhere, but it's one of those cards that I've seen cast 3 or 4 different times, and every time it's done something useful.
Yeah.
I think perhaps if Copy Artifact wasn't, $25 and really difficult to find because it hasn't been reprinted since revised, and it's on the reserved list, this was maybe a little less impactful, but Copy Artifact is tough to find, and it is $25, and this is, easy to find, and it's 25 cents or something. So
couple bucks, but yeah.
And it does hit enchantments as well. You get some extra versatility. It's way easier to get a hold of. It's been really useful whenever I've seen it cast. I don't have it in a deck, but it's the card we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
I'm running both of the green legends in my Recce deck. Yorvo, Lord of Garin Brig, is the first one. That's the 3-mana rare who comes into play with 4+1 counters on him. And whenever another green creature enters the battlefield under my control, I put a +1 counter on Yorvo. And if that creature's power is greater than Yorvo's, I put a second counter on it. Which I don't think has ever happened. I don't think, because he comes into play at 4, and then when something comes in, he goes to 5 immediately. So there's only a finite amount of creatures that are going to come into play after him that are going to get an extra counter. That's a nice thing in theory, but for the most part, he's just a 4/4 that slowly gets bigger. But for 3 mana, Tripp Green is kind of a pain in the butt, but it's not in a mono green deck. So he's just a really efficient beater that gets bigger, and that deck I have him in does have some +1 counter synergy. There's things like Rishkar, which lets me tap creatures with +1 counters on them to get mana, and I've actually used him one time to get a green mana out of him when I needed to do something and I was tapped out for mana otherwise. So there's, in my particular deck, that's some extra synergy. He's been good, and I have no plans to pull him out. And I also have Sir Farron the Hengehammer in that deck. He's the uncommon knight, and he's a 2/2 for 2 mana. When he attacks, another target attacking creature gets XX till end of turn, where X is Sir Farron's power. It's pretty easy in that deck of mine to buff up a creature's power, and there's been at least one game where that ability on him has let me reconfigure my attackers by buffing Reki with Sir Farron to allow Reki to do lethal damage on one person, lethal commander damage.
Mm-hmm.
And then let me send my creatures in some other way to kill the other 2 people that I couldn't have done if I wouldn't have had Sir Farron's ability buffing my commander to do commander damage. It's not a backbreaking card. It's not fantastic. I don't even know if it's good in any deck but Reki History Kamigawa. But in the deck where I'm running it, both of those 2 legends have been solid so far.
Nice. Real nice.
And I will also mention the red rare legend who is Torbrand, excuse me. Torbrand has been an absolute monster whenever I've seen him either in a deck or atop a deck.
Yeah, because Curse runs them in Mogus, and that's so much damage all the time.
So, of the legends, that's been really, really impressive so far, too, that I've seen. So, handing it back to you, Max. What's next?
I have one last one. And I think I talked about this a few weeks ago when Dan Krause was here on the show, but Once in Future, it's a 3 and a green for an instant. You can return target card from your graveyard to your hand and then put up to one other target card from your graveyard on the top of your library, and then you exile Once in Future. But it also has Adamant, the new keyword from Throne of Eldraine. If at least 3 green mana were spent to cast the spell, instead return both of those cards to your hand.
Nice.
I have cast this a handful of times now, and it always gets me... I always have Adamant.
Sure.
It's a 2-color deck, but it always gets me either a ramp spell back or a Wrath or that Baneslayer Angel that you just killed, some way with a Beast Within. It's so useful. Being at instant speed, if you don't have Adamant, it sets up your draw for the next turn. It's just such a powerhouse in the decks I'm running it in. I was super impressed with how good this card is. It's been very
solid whenever I've seen it cast against me as well. I got a couple more here I will mention. The first of which is Fabled Passage. The downside I will mention here, Fabled Passage is expensive. It was hopefully going to be a budget replacement for fetch lands, and it's just not. I mean, I guess it's cheaper than an Arid Mesa or something, but it's not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. And I highly doubt your deck is that much worse running a Terramorphic Expanse. I mean, it's worse technically, but that's not an upgrade that you're going to see make a difference in 99 out of 100 games. It's just not. However, it is a better card, and there's been times when I've cracked it in a game, and being able to go get that land untapped is really, really useful. It's nice having lands come into play untapped. So I have it in a deck that also has a Crucible of Worlds. It just gives me one more land I can reuse with Crucible. I also have it in my Mina and Den deck, which cares about landfall. So it gives me just one more landfall land in that deck that brings the land into play untapped as well. So I can use it right away. It's a really useful card. I will say the same thing about Prismatic Vista, which we discussed when that came out in Modern Horizons. Again, it's not a budget card, and it's it didn't really solve the problem of being a budget replacement for fetch lands. It's just something people run in addition to their fetch lands, but they're both good cards.
Right. And Fabled Passage gets a lot of help from Pioneer too, with that being a viable format now. It's the one fetch land besides Evolving Wilds, I think, that's in Pioneer.
It's what they can use to go get that land
Yep.
So let's see. So one that I'm running in 2 different decks, and I will say this, I have not cast it successfully in either deck, is Questing Beast.
Okay.
And I know it's been it's been an effective card in Standard so far. I'm not sure if it's seeing play in Pioneer, although it wouldn't shock me if it is. But I've seen it cast against me 2 different times, and it's really difficult to deal with. Again, we kind of thought it would be. So this is confirmation from me having played against it. It's just a colossal pain in the butt to figure out how you're going to handle it. Creatures are going to come through and deal damage. It can be prevented. People can do weird things with fogs then, where they can fog and your creatures don't do damage, but theirs still do because it gets around fog abilities. It's just a giant annoying card, and I want to cast it in one of the 2 decks I have it in and have not managed to do so yet. But like I said, when I've seen it, it's been a problem.
Oh, yeah. Oof.
So do you have any ones that you've seen, Max, but that you're not playing but have done work when you've seen someone else cast them?
Yeah, I actually have one, and it's Fires of Invention. Chris runs this in Mogus.
Okay.
So for those who don't know, it's 3 and a red for an enchantment. You can cast spells only during your turn, and you can cast no more than 2 spells each turn. But you may cast spells with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control without paying their mana costs. So in Chris's Mogus deck, this just lets him slow the game down and let the deck do what it does.
Yeah.
You know, AoE damage over time, it allows him so he doesn't have to overextend or risk overextending because, cool, I have 4 lands, I'm going to drop,
right,
a Torbrand and then go.
Yeah, it's a card that requires you to be, pretty particular with when you play it and in what deck you're going to run it in. But whenever I've seen it hit the field, you kind of have to deal with it.
It reminds me a lot of Experimental Frenzy from Guilds of Ravnica.
Yeah.
Similar mana cost, 3 and a red. Experimental Frenzy lets you look at the top card of your library. You may play that card, and you just can't play cards from your hand. So these 2 together would be pretty interesting.
For sure. Yeah, that it's like I said, it's done work when I've seen it hit the battlefield.
Yeah.
Toma of Legends is one I'll bring up here that I'm running, but I've seen it cast in a couple different, I want to say Boros decks. It's 2 mana. When it enters battlefield with a page counter on it, and whenever your commander comes into play or attacks, put a page counter on it as well. And you can spend 1 and tap it to remove a page counter from Toma of Legends and draw a card. So, spend 2 mana to cast it, 1 mana to draw that first card, and then you have to put counters back on it using your commander. But even in my Zero deck, mono white, Zero doesn't attack that often. I don't think I've found myself in a point in the game where I haven't been able, where I've been stuck and unable to use it. I think whenever I've cast it, there's just been that first page counter on it. It's easy to replenish it with a swing or a cast of your commander. If you have any proliferate effects, you to put a couple more on it. It's just been really good. And similarly, whenever someone's cast it against me in their deck, I think I've seen it at least in one Aurelia deck where it comes down, Aurelia swings, it immediately puts a second counter on it, they draw a card, and from that point on, there's just always a counter on it, and it's just always pay 1 mana, draw a card.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not at all a flashy card, and I don't think it's probably not good enough to run outside of Boros or white or mono red. There's just too many other options in the other colors. But in those colors, if you're playing Boros or white or red where you have a limited card draw option, it's really, really efficient. So that's one I definitely have been happy with when I've played it, and I will definitely say whenever I've seen someone else use it, it's for sure done work.
Nice.
Well, I'm getting to the end here of my list. There's only 1 or 2 left. The next one I will mention here is Shambling Suit, which is an uncommon for 3 mana. It's an artifact creature construct. Shambling Suit's power is equal to the number of artifacts and or enchantments you control. I'm running it in my Vela deck, which is an artifact-heavy deck. So regularly, I've dropped it on turn 3, and hey, it's been a 2/3, which is unexciting, but not awful necessarily, particularly when on turn 4 it turns into a 4/3, and on turn 6 it's a 9/3 or something. And there are times I just drop it and it's immediately like a 9/3 or a 10/3 or a 12/3. It has to get reckoned with in a deck where it's really easy to make it unblockable with Vela. Again, I don't know if it's that amazing in a non-artifact centric deck, but there's a lot of artifact centric decks out there where you just, or even equipment decks, like if you're just playing some kind of a Boros equipment list, and you've got a bunch of equipment out and you drop this as a really efficient and it comes into play as like a 9/3, people have to reckon with that in addition to your suited up commander.
Right.
It's efficient. It's really strong. And, I mentioned, I keep talking about artifacts, but like even in my Vela artifact deck, there's 5 enchantments in that deck, which also add to that number. And also not irrelevant entirely, it's a construct, which means you can go fetch it with something like the new Scrapyard Recombiner that was in Modern Horizons that lets you sacrifice an artifact to search for a construct. Like that's not nothing either. I've actually gone to get it before with Recombiner.
Nice.
So it's just, I've been very happy with it. In that particular deck, I'm running 21 creatures, and the last couple artifact creature slots have been not that amazing. And hey, something that costs 3 mana that's going to be relevant at almost any point in the game. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted there. So that's been a great addition to that deck. I think the last one here I have that I will mention is one that I've also seen cast against me. I didn't put it in my deck right away, and that's a Witching Well. But having Seen Witching Well get cast against me, it's not Ponder. I mean, Ponder draws you a card, but it's an artifact. And if you're playing an artifact kind of deck, having that sit out there as an artifact is sometimes worth the fact that it's not Ponder. And if you need to later on when you're not, trying to get Metalcraft or trying to deal with getting Affinity or something, crack it and draw 2 cards, that's fairly useful. It's very unexciting and very effective. So I've wound up recently putting it in my Vela deck as well. I had talked about doing it there, but I never did. And just having seen how unassumingly effective it has been in a couple of decks where I've seen it cast. I think I saw it cast once in an Urza deck, and I've seen it at least in 1, if not 2 Brea decks. It was just value town in those decks. So I actually, the reason I mentioned Ponder is I replaced Ponder with Witching Well in my Vela deck. It's 1 more artifact for things that care about my artifact count. Same exact casting cost. It's going to sit out there and add to the Tezzerets, and it's going to add to Shambling Suit. And it's just one of those quiet, sneakily effective cards that I like so much. And other people won me over on including it into my deck.
Very nice. Well, we're talking artifacts. Have you put Crashing Drawbridge into Vela yet?
I have not, because the haste doesn't matter that much.
Okay.
Particularly because it itself doesn't have haste, so I would have to have it out the turn before, and the deck doesn't really play that way. But
gotcha.
That's, I didn't have that on my list, but I've seen Crashing Drawbridge cast against me a few times, and it's always been supremely annoying.
Yes, I will 100% agree with that.
Yeah, I think Dan Kraus, when he was here, had it in at least 1 deck, if not 2. And, at first glance, you're like, well, that's great in Arcades decks, and it obviously is, but there's a lot of decks that don't have access to mass haste. Most of them, probably, if you're not playing red, or I guess green has Concordant Crossroads. Beyond that, you're talking, 7 mana for a Criminal's Memorial?
Yep, or a lot of money for a Hall of the Bandit Lord.
Right. Which, again, is only 1 creature. Whereas this, you can give your team haste. That's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
So, that's a card that, and I think we talked about it and mentioned it, that it was useful, but it's been much better than it appeared to be, or at least in the decks when it gets played, it is very, very impactful and worth noting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the ones I had, Max, that I've seen or that I made notes about. Is there any more from you, or is that it?
That is it.
I think that's pretty good. I think that's a lot of cards from a set that I think have shown up in Commander and have been effective so far. And we're not even talking about things like Oko that just blew up other formats.
Right. I mean, as we were doing prep for this show, I made the comment. I said, I've put more cards in from Throne of Eldraine than I did War of the Spark and Modern Horizons and the core set combined.
I didn't check because I did put a lot of cards from those sets in. But I just put a lot of cards in this year in general, between Modern Horizons and between War of the Spark. And the core set was really good for a core set.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just been a big year for making changes to decks in general. And I feel like that may be the new normal moving forward. I guess we'll see.
I think the same thing.
This is a subject that I'd like to hear back from people. If there's any ones that you've seen that we didn't talk about that really stand out, because especially I think the last 2 months this fall, we've been playing in a somewhat closed, I shouldn't say a closed meta. We just haven't been traveling the last 2 months really. So like Throne came out, I guess I went to Command Fest Chicago for the weekend, but I think that's all I've really played outside the shop.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you've gone anywhere either in that window. Have you? I don't think so.
Just to the shop the few times I have.
So we've got a bit of a limited experience with Eldraine. In the summer we were going all over the place and seeing a lot of different decks and metas and environments. But since Eldraine came out, that hasn't really been true. So I would love to hear back from listeners about what cards they've seen from this set that have performed really well, or maybe ones that you thought were going to perform well that haven't. Because I didn't have that many of those.
Mm-hmm. Same here.
Maybe that's just bias. Maybe you just you notice the strong performers and don't notice the weak performers, and I just didn't notice the ones that underperformed. So yeah, that would be what I'd love to hear back from people. If you could let us know on Twitter or email or whatever, that would be really useful. I think for us to hear some feedback there.
Yeah.
All right. That is going to wrap it up. We do not have a Thursday show this week, but we'll be back next week, I think, with the guest. We haven't officially finalized that yet, but I think we got somebody 95% of the way there. So we'll be back next week with 2 shows and a special guest filling in for the injured Chris. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Our show's edited by Ken Peddle. You can find him on Twitter at LOAD3R. You can find myself on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1 if you want to tweet at him and ask how his foot's doing.
Yeah, send him some get well tweets.
No Thursday show, but we'll be back next Monday. Until then, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.